By 7:30, the street was locked down with yellow tape and patrol cars. The neighborhood gathered in small knots, tenants in bathrobes, shopkeepers with coffee steaming in paper cups, a pair of kids cutting school who stood too close until a cop barked them back. The body stayed where it was, half lit by the rising sun, one eye open, staring at nothing. Detective Jonah Mercer arrived just before 8. He parked his unmarked Plymouth a block away and walked in, collar up, hands deep in his coat pockets. He'd been up since 5, smoking and staring at his kitchen wall, thinking about nothing in particular. 42 years old, divorced, living alone in a rent-controlled walk-up on West End Avenue. The job had etched itself into his posture, slight forward lean, like he was always bracing for a blow. Mercer ducked under the tape and nodded to the uniforms. "Morning," he said, voice already flat. The victim was white, mid-40s maybe, dressed better than the street would suggest. Wool overcoat, brown leather shoes that had been shined recently. No wallet in sight. His face was swollen on one side, the cheekbone fractured, lips split. Blood had pooled beneath his head and run toward the gutter in a lazy line. Medical examiner crouched nearby, a cigarette smoldering, forgotten between his fingers. "Name yet?" Mercer asked. "Not on him," the ME said, "but he's not a local transient. Teeth are good, hands too clean. I'd say he came here to die or didn't know he was going to." Mercer squatted, ignoring the damp seeping through his trousers. He studied the man's hands. No defensive wounds. Nails clean, trimmed. A thin gold ring on the right hand. Unusual placement. There was a puncture at the base of the neck, small and precise, half hidden by the collar. "Cause?" Mercer said. "Stabbed," the ME replied. "Thin blade. Went in under the clavicle, nicked the subclavian artery. He bled out fast. The face damage came first, probably to drop him. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." Mercer stood and scanned the street. Orchard was still shaking off the night. Empty beer bottles by the curb, a busted crate of oranges spilling into the gutter, graffiti layered thick on brick walls. It wasn't a place you brought someone accidentally. A uniform approached. "Detective, we canvassed the block. Old woman in 3B says she heard voices around 2 a.m., male voices. Thought it was a fight but didn't look. What'd they say?" She couldn't make out words. Said one voice was calm, other one scared. Mercer nodded. Calm always bothered him more. He moved to the doorway where the body had been found. The shoe repair shop had been closed for months. Eviction notice still taped crookedly to the glass. There were scuff marks on the threshold, a smear of blood where the victim's head had struck the metal frame. Mercer crouched again, this time closer, breathing in the metallic tang of blood mixed with urine and old leather. He noticed something else, a faint scent of aftershave, sharp and clean, out of place. He straightened. "Get CSU to bag the clothes. Check for fibers. And I want that ring photographed and run." The ME stubbed out his cigarette. "You thinking robbery?" "Maybe," Mercer said. But he still got his watch. A Timex, scratched but functional, still ticking. By 10 they had a name. The ring came back engraved. E.L. Inside the coat pocket, overlooked in the rush, was a matchbook from a midtown bar, the Lantern Room. The bartender there recognized the description immediately. "Evan Lasker," he said. "Comes in a couple times a week. Works in publishing, I think. Quiet guy. Tips okay. Publishing." Mercer felt a faint click in his head, the sound of a door opening to another room. Lasker's address was a co-op off Riverside Drive. Too clean, too bright. The doorman looked shaken when Mercer showed the badge. "Mr. Lasker didn't come home last night," he said. "I assumed he stayed out." The apartment was immaculate. Bookshelves lined one wall, heavy on history and European fiction. A desk by the window held a stack of manuscripts, neatly arranged. Mercer flipped through the top one, typed, double-spaced, with handwritten notes in the margins, red pen. The name on the cover wasn't Lasker's. In the bedroom, Mercer found the phone off the hook, no sign of a struggle. On the nightstand sat a photograph in a simple frame, Lasker standing beside another man, both smiling stiffly. The other man had a familiar face, angular, handsome in a way that suggested calculation. Mercer studied it, feeling the faint itch of recognition. Back at the precinct, he tacked the photo to the corkboard and stared at it until the room emptied. Outside, the city went on, indifferent and loud. Somewhere between Orchard Street and Riverside Drive, a line had been crossed. Mercer lit a cigarette and exhaled slowly. The calm voice the old woman had heard echoed in his mind. He had the sense, sudden and unwelcome, that this one wasn't going to stay contained. Mercer didn't sleep. He lay on his couch with the lights off, listening to the radiator bang like a bad heart. The photograph stayed with him, the other man's face, too composed, too practiced. By morning, recognition came not as a name, but as a context, a voice he'd heard on a radio panel once. A byline clipped from the Times, Arthur Bell. Bell was a minor celebrity in certain circles, essayist, cultural critic. He wrote about decay, of cities, of morals, with a precision that made people feel flayed. Mercer remembered reading one of his pieces during the blackout the summer before, sitting in his kitchen by candlelight, thinking the man sounded like he'd never been afraid in his life. By 9 a.m., Mercer was at Bell's office in Midtown. The building smelled of polish and money. Carpet thick enough to hide bodies, Mercer thought. Bell's secretary was young and defensive, perched behind a desk like a shield. "Mr. Bell is unavailable." Mercer showed the badge. "Make him available." Bell emerged a minute later, tie loosened just enough to signal approachability. Up close, the face from the photo was sharper, eyes pale and alert. "Detective," Bell said, extending a hand. Mercer didn't take it. "You know Evan Lasker?" Mercer asked. Bell's smile flickered, the briefest misstep. "Of course. He was my editor. Is something wrong?" "He's dead." The office seemed to inhale. Bell's hand dropped back to his side. "Dead?" "Stabbed on Orchard Street last night." Bell sat down slowly. That's impossible. Evan doesn't go downtown." "Looks like he did." Bell rubbed his temple. "We had a disagreement," he said carefully, "about a manuscript. But nothing like this." "What manuscript?" Bell gestured to a stack of papers on his desk. "A book. Essays. Evan was pushing me to cut a chapter, said it was libelous." "Was it?" Bell's eyes hardened. It was true. Mercer watched him, cataloging every movement. "Where were you last night?" "At home," Bell said. "Alone." "No one can confirm that?" Bell's mouth twitched. "No." Mercer let the silence stretch. Then, "You know why he was on Orchard Street?" Bell shook his head. "I don't even know where that is." Mercer believed he believed that didn't mean he believed Bell. Back at the precinct, Mercer went through Lasker's phone records. One number came up again and again in the last week, always late. A payphone in the East Village. Mercer took a car and walked the block until he found it, outside a bodega with flickering fluorescent lights. The owner remembered Lasker. "Nice guy," he said. "Always nervous, always looking over his shoulder." Who was he calling? The owner shrugged. No idea. But once he was waiting for someone. A woman. Blonde. Coat like it cost more than my store. Mercer tracked the coat first. It led him to a woman named Claire Novak, gallery assistant 28, living in a fourth-floor walk-up that smelled of turpentine and cigarettes. She answered the door with the chain still on. Her eyes went immediately to the badge. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. Inside, the apartment was spare but intentional. A single painting leaned against the wall, abstract and violent. Evan was scared, Claire said, sitting cross-legged on the couch. He thought someone was following him. Who? He wouldn't say. He said it was tied to the book. To Bell. Mercer nodded. Did you meet him last night? Yes. Where? Not Orchard Street, she said quickly. At a diner on Houston. He gave me something. She stood and went to a drawer, pulling out a manila envelope. Inside were photocopied pages, financial records, payments routed through shell companies, names obscured but patterns clear. At the top of one page, handwritten in red, A.B. Bell? Mercer asked. Claire nodded. Evan said Bell was being paid to soften certain critiques. That he'd taken money to kill a story about a real estate group tied to the city. Mercer felt the pieces shift. Why give this to you? He didn't trust the police, she said. No offense. None taken. After the diner, he said he had to meet someone. Wouldn't tell me who. Did he seem afraid? Yes, she said. But also relieved. Like he thought it was almost over. Mercer left with the envelope under his arm, the weight of it heavier than paper. He went back to Orchard Street after dark, standing where the body had been. The street was alive now. Music, laughter, the smell of frying oil. Whatever had happened there had already been absorbed. A man leaned against the brick nearby, smoking, older, watching Mercer too closely. You the cop from yesterday? The man said. Yes. I saw something, the man said. Didn't want to talk then. Mercer waited. There was a car, the man said, parked down the block. Big, black, engine running. Who was in it? Driver stayed inside. Another guy came out. Tall, calm, didn't rush. Mercer's stomach tightened. Which way'd he go? Toward Delancey. Mercer pictured Bell's office. The plush carpet. The careful hands. The calm voice. Back at his apartment, Mercer spread the financial records on the table. Names emerged with patience. Developers, councilmen, a network of influence that thrived on silence. His phone rang just after midnight. Yes, Mercer said. A pause. Then, Bell's voice. Detective, he said, we need to talk. Where are you? Somewhere private. Mercer closed his eyes. Arthur, he said, using the first name deliberately. Evan trusted you, Bell laughed softly. That was his mistake. The line went dead. Mercer stood in the dark, the city humming beyond the window. The case had shifted. It wasn't about a body in a doorway anymore. It was about how far a man would go to keep his world intact. And Mercer knew with the cold certainty of experience, that Orchard Street wasn't the end of it. The address Bell texted came through 10 minutes later. A warehouse on the west side, the kind of place that pretended to be abandoned but wasn't. Mercer drove with the radio off, windows cracked, city air cold and wet. He didn't call it in. Not yet. He wanted to see Bell in his natural environment, without uniforms flattening the shape of things. The warehouse door was unlocked. Inside, the space smelled of dust and oil. Old machinery rusted into silence. A single light burned near the back, throwing a hard circle onto the concrete floor. Bell stood in it, coat off, sleeves rolled. He looked smaller here, stripped of context. "You shouldn't have come alone," Bell said. Mercer stopped 10 feet away. "You shouldn't have called." Bell smiled thinly. "You're chasing the wrong thing." Evan didn't understand the rules. "Then explain them," Mercer said. Bell gestured to a folding chair. "Sit." Mercer didn't. "Start talking." Bell exhaled. "The book was going to ruin people, powerful people, men who don't accept consequences the way you think they should. So you took their money." "I took their offer," Bell said. "There's a difference." Mercer stepped closer. "Did you kill him?" Bell's eyes flicked, just once, toward the shadows beyond the light. Mercer followed the glance with his peripheral vision and saw movement. Someone else was there. "Evan was panicking," Bell said. "He thought exposing me would make him safe. It wouldn't have." "Who was in the car on Orchard Street?" Mercer asked. Bell hesitated. Long enough. Mercer drew his gun. "Arthur," Mercer said quietly, "this is where you stop lying." A man stepped out of the shadows, late 30s, clean cut, military posture. He held a knife loosely at his side, like an extension of his hand. "This doesn't concern you," the man said. "It concerns me," Mercer replied. "Gun steady. Put it down." Bell's voice sharpened. "No, this is already handled." The knife moved first. The man lunged. Mercer fired once, the sound deafening in the cavernous space. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He hit the floor hard, knife skittering away. Bell froze. Mercer moved fast, kicking the knife out of reach, cuffing the man while he groaned through clenched teeth. "Who is he?" Mercer demanded. Bell sagged into the chair. "A problem solver," he said. "Not mine originally." "Did he kill Evan?" Bell nodded. "I told him to scare him. Just scare him. Evan fought." Mercer felt the familiar hollow open in his chest. "You set it in motion." "Yes," Bell said. "But I didn't stab him." "That's not going to matter." Sirens approached. Someone nearby must have heard the shot. Mercer felt relief cut through the tension like a blade. At the precinct, Bell lawyered up immediately. The man with the knife, his name was Thomas Rake, stayed quiet until the painkillers wore off. Then he talked. He'd been hired through intermediaries. Cash. Instructions precise. Break Evan Lasker's face. Make him understand silence. When Evan ran, Rake followed. The stab was reflex. Training. Mercer wrote it all down, every word. It would take months, maybe years, to unwind the rest. The money, the favors, the rot. Some of it would never see daylight. He knew that, too. 3 days later, Mercer stood again on Orchard Street. The doorway was empty now. The shoe repair shop still shuttered. Eviction notice curling at the edges. Claire Novak stood beside him, hands in her coat pockets. "They say Bell might walk," she said. "They say a lot of things," Mercer replied. "He killed him," she said. "He killed him," Mercer agreed. "Just not with his own hands." She nodded, eyes wet but steady. "Thank you." Mercer watched her walk away, absorbed by the street. That night, alone in his apartment, Mercer poured a drink and sat by the window. The city stretched out, endless and indifferent. He thought about Evan Lasker, his neat desk, his quiet fear. About Bell, who'd believed intellect could insulate him from blood. Mercer finished the drink and set the glass down. The radiator banged. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and faded. The case wasn't clean. It never was. But the truth, such as it was, had surfaced. And in New York, in the 70s, that was as close to justice as anyone got. The indictment stalled in committee. That was the word Mercer got on a gray Thursday afternoon, delivered by a tired ADA who smelled like coffee and defeat. Bell's lawyer had friends. Rake's confession was solid, but the money trail led upward into fog. Shell companies dissolving, records lost, witnesses developing sudden amnesia. Bell himself stayed out on bail, doing interviews that framed him as a misunderstood intellectual caught in a political witch hunt. Mercer watched one of them on a barroom television, the sound off. Bell's face filled the screen, composed, regretful without admitting anything. The bartender snorted. "Guy like that," he said, wiping a glass. "He'll be fine." Mercer didn't answer. He went back to Lasker's apartment that night. It was supposed to be sealed, but the doorman let him up anyway. The place felt smaller now, like it had already begun to forget its owner. Mercer walked the perimeter slowly, letting his eyes rest where they wanted. At the desk, he noticed something he'd missed before: the wastebasket. He dumped it onto the blotter and sifted through receipts, carbon copies, torn envelopes. At the bottom, folded small and tight, was a page from a legal pad. Only one line written on it, in Lasker's careful hand. "Ask him about Marrow House." Mercer said it out loud. Marrow House. It sounded like a bad joke or a private club. He folded the page into his pocket and left. Marrow House turned out to be a townhouse on the Upper East Side. Old money dressed up as philanthropy. The plaque by the door listed a foundation name Mercer didn't recognize. Inside, the walls were lined with oil portraits of men who donated libraries in ruined neighborhoods. A receptionist eyed Mercer's badge with practiced neutrality. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Mercer said, "but I have questions." She made a call. 10 minutes later, Mercer was sitting across from a man named Harold Fisk, board member, real estate investor, civic booster. Fisk's handshake was damp. "Arthur Bell's name came up," Mercer said. Fisk smiled thinly. "Arthur is a valued contributor to our lecture series." "So was Evan Lasker," Mercer said. "Until he wasn't." The smile faded. "I don't know what you're implying." Mercer leaned forward. "Marrow House was paying Bell through cutouts. Lasker found it. That's why he died." Fisk's eyes hardened. "That's an outrageous accusation." "Then sue me," Mercer said. "But answer one thing first. Who told Bell to make it stop?" Silence filled the room, heavy and deliberate. "You don't understand how things work," Fisk said finally. "No one told Arthur to do anything. He understood the stakes." "Enough to hire a killer?" Fisk stood. "This interview is over." Mercer stood too. "It's not," he said. "Not really." Outside, the city felt sharper. Mercer lit a cigarette and watched smoke vanish into cold air. He had motive, structure, implication. What he didn't have was proof that could survive daylight. That proof came unexpectedly from Rake. The call came at 2 in the morning. Rake had asked to see Mercer. No lawyer. No conditions. In the interview room, Rake looked smaller, the violence drained out of him, replaced by something close to fear. "They're going to kill me," Rake said. "Who?" Mercer asked. "Same people who paid me," Rake said. "Bell was a middleman. He always was." Rake slid a folded slip of paper across the table. Names, dates, addresses. A ledger, memorized and rewritten from habit. "I kept it," Rake said. "Insurance. Didn't think I'd need it this soon." Mercer read the names. Fisk was there. So were 2 city councilmen. a zoning commissioner, a banker whose face Mercer recognized from charity galas. "This helps you," Mercer said. "It helps you," Rake replied. "Helps me stay breathing." Mercer moved fast. Warrants followed. Doors opened that hadn't planned to. The papers got hold of it, and for a brief, electric moment, the city paid attention. Bell was picked up again, this time without cameras. He looked older now, the composure cracked. In the holding room, Mercer stood across from him one last time. "You should have let him publish," Mercer said. Bell laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You think that would have saved him?" "No," Mercer said. "But it would have meant something." Bell leaned back. "Meaning is a luxury. Not to Evan." Bell's eyes flickered, just once. Evan wanted to be brave. He wasn't built for it. Mercer left him there. The trial dates were set. Deals were whispered. Some names would fall. Others would be redacted into history. On a Sunday afternoon, Mercer walked the length of Riverside Park. The river was steel-colored, restless. Families passed him, kids running, dogs pulling at leashes. Claire Novak waited on a bench, scarf tight around her neck. "They're calling Evan a footnote," she said when he sat. "He isn't," Mercer replied. She handed him a slim book, advance copy. Lasker's name on the spine, posthumous. "They're publishing it as he wrote it," she said. "No cuts." Mercer turned it over in his hands. It felt heavier than it should have. "That matters," he said. Claire nodded. "Thank you for not letting it disappear." Mercer watched her walk away again, this time into sunlight. That night, back in his apartment, Mercer opened the book and began to read. Outside, the city kept moving, grinding forward, chewing its own history. Some truths survived that. Others didn't. But this one had teeth. The verdict came down on a Tuesday, just before noon. Mercer sat in the back of the courtroom, hands folded, jaw tight. He'd learned not to hope for clean endings. Still, when the foreman stood and read the words, something in Mercer's chest loosened. Arthur Bell was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Not murder itself, not the blade, but the chain that led to it. The jury took less than 2 days. Bell didn't look at anyone as the sentence was read. His face had gone pale. The cultivated calm finally burned away, leaving something thin and frightened underneath. Thomas Rake took a deal. 25 years. Enough to keep him off the street for the rest of his useful life. He never looked at Mercer again after the sentencing. Just stared straight ahead, as if already practicing disappearance. Harold Fisk never saw the inside of a courtroom. He suffered a cardiac episode 3 weeks before subpoenas were issued. Closed casket, generous obituaries. The foundation quietly dissolved, its assets redistributed through channels that would never be fully traced. 2 councilmen resigned. 1 banker fled to Switzerland. The zoning commissioner testified and kept his pension. It wasn't justice. It was arithmetic. 3 nights later, Mercer returned to Orchard Street for the last time. The shoe repair shop was gone now, replaced by plywood and a hand-painted sign announcing future renovations. The doorway it had been scrubbed clean. No stain remained. Just another shadow among many. Mercer stood there longer than necessary, hands in his coat pockets, breath fogging the air. He tried to picture Evan Lasker's last moments. The fear, yes, but also the resolve, the decision to stop running. A decision Mercer understood too well. At home, Mercer packed a box. He didn't own much worth packing. Books, mostly. Files he'd kept copies of, though he didn't need them anymore. He took Lasker's book off the shelf and placed it carefully on top. The department had offered him a commendation. A small ceremony. a handshake from men who would forget his name by winter. He declined. Instead, he filed his papers and handed in his badge on a Friday afternoon. No speeches, no warnings. Just a quiet nod from a captain who understood what it cost to keep looking too closely. That night, Mercer walked down to the river with a bottle and sat on a bench overlooking the black water. The city reflected itself in broken lines, never holding still. Claire Novak joined him without asking. "They printed a second run," she said. "The book." "Good," Mercer said. "They want me to curate a show around it. Art's about silence. Complicity." He smiled faintly. "That'll make friends." She laughed once. "I'm past worrying about that." They sat in silence, sharing the bottle. Somewhere across the water, a train horn sounded low and mournful. "Do you regret it?" she asked. Mercer considered the question carefully. "No," he said, "but I don't mistake it for victory." She nodded. That might be the most honest answer. When she left, Mercer stayed until the bottle was empty, and the night grew colder. Weeks later, Bell was transferred upstate. On the way out, he asked to see Mercer. The request made its way through channels and landed, improbably, on Mercer's kitchen table in the form of a phone call. Mercer went. Bell sat behind glass now, stripped of context and authority. Prison grays didn't suit him. "You came," Bell said. "I wanted to see how meaning was treating you," Mercer replied. Bell's mouth tightened. "You think this absolves you?" "No," Mercer said. "Nothing does." Bell leaned forward. Evan believed exposure would change things. "Do you?" Mercer held his gaze. "I think silence guarantees they won't." Bell looked away. That was the end of it. Spring came late that year. When it finally arrived, Mercer packed his car and drove north, following the river until the city thinned and the noise gave way to space. In the trunk sat a single box of books. One of them bore Evan Lasker's name. Mercer didn't know what came next. He didn't need to. Some stories ended not with redemption, but with clarity. In New York, in the 70s, that was rare enough to matter. Now let's begin the next story for tonight. The frost hadn't burned off yet when Sheriff Calder Rourke pulled his cruiser onto County Road 6. Cornfields stretched flat and dead to the horizon, stalks snapped short by the combine, snow dusting the black soil like ash. A mile ahead, a lone farmhouse squatted under a pale sky. Two squad cars were already there, red and blue lights bleeding into the morning. Calder cut the engine and sat for a second, hands on the wheel. He'd been sheriff of Grayson, Iowa for 11 years. Population 4,812 if you counted the farms. Nothing ever happened here that didn't involve livestock, meth, or both. The call that dragged him out of bed at 5:12 a.m. had been simple. Found deceased, possible homicide. Possible meant unlikely. Until it wasn't. He stepped out into the cold. Deputy Nolan Pike stood near the porch, collar turned up, eyes darting everywhere except the open front door. "Morning," Calder said. Nolan grimaced. "Didn't think we'd see you so fast. You said possible homicide." "Yeah, I wish I hadn't." Calder followed his gaze. "Who found him?" "Paper carrier. Kid named Travis Bell. He saw the door open, thought maybe a dog got loose. Went in, came back out screaming." "Who's him?" Nolan swallowed. "Elias Crowder." Calder stopped walking. Crowder had been in Grayson longer than anyone alive. Owned half the farmland north of town, sat on the bank board, funded the library expansion, and sued the school district twice. Widower, no kids. Lived alone. 81 years old, and mean as a kicked hornet. Calder took a breath and climbed the porch steps. The house smelled wrong. Not rot. Too early for that. But copper and something sharp, like bleach that hadn't finished its work. The living room lights were on. A lamp lay shattered near the couch. One chair was overturned. Elias Crowder lay on his back near the fireplace, pajama top soaked dark, legs splayed, eyes open and glassy. A poker rested a foot from his right hand, its iron tip slick with blood. Calder crouched, careful not to step in the spreading stain on the rug. Crowder's throat was cut clean, almost surgical, deep enough to expose white. "This wasn't a fall," Calder said quietly. Nolan shook his head. "No, sir." Calder scanned the room. No sign of forced entry on the door. Windows locked. The mantel clock read 2:17. It wasn't ticking. "Who touched anything?" Calder asked. "No one. I stopped Pike from moving the poker." Calder nodded. Pike was young but not stupid. He stood and looked around again, slower this time. The coffee table had been shoved aside. A framed photo lay face down. Calder flipped it with a gloved hand. Crowder and a younger woman, maybe late 40s, standing in front of a courthouse. She wasn't smiling. "Anyone know who that is?" Calder asked. Nolan shrugged. "Could be his niece. He had some family down in Missouri, I think." Calder set the frame back. "M.E. on the way?" "Yes, sir. Sioux City." Calder moved into the kitchen. A single mug sat by the sink, coffee cold. No second cup. The knife block was full, except for the largest blade. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. Back in the living room, he stared at Crowder's face. The old man's expression wasn't fear. It was surprise, like he'd been interrupted mid-sentence. Calder straightened. "Who was working the overnight?" "Just me and Pike," Nolan said. "Quiet shift. Anyone seen Crowder yesterday?" "Gas station clerk said he filled up around 4. Didn't buy anything else. Left alone." Calder rubbed his jaw. "Neighbors? Closest is half a mile." Calder stepped back outside. The sky had brightened, clouds thinning to a dull white. He spotted the paper carrier sitting in Pike's cruiser, wrapped in a blanket, eyes red. "Get his statement when he's ready," Calder said. "Then take him home." Nolan nodded. Calder walked the perimeter of the house. No footprints besides the paper carrier's bike tracks and the deputy's boots. The snow was thin, patchy. Anyone careful could have avoided leaving much. He circled back to the porch and paused. Something dark stained the wooden step near the door. A smear, not a drip. Transfer. He crouched and leaned closer. Blood. Someone had stepped in it and wiped their shoe on the way out. Calder stood slowly. Inside, he pulled Nolan aside. "Who hates Crowder enough to kill him?" Nolan snorted. "That list's longer than your arm." "Give me names," Nolan thought. "Marlene Huxley. He foreclosed on her farm last year. Randy Sloan. Crowder reported him for dumping waste. Pastor Whitcomb had words with him about the cemetery land dispute. Half the town thinks Crowder poisoned the well water in '09. Calder listened. He already knew most of it. Crowder had been a pressure point in Grayson. Push long enough, something breaks. "Anyone close to him?" Calder asked. "Not that I know of." He kept to himself. Calder looked back at the body. Someone was close enough. The M.E. arrived just after 8. Calder watched from the doorway as the woman in scrubs examined the wound, measured depth, angle. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Time of death, between midnight and 2. Clean cut, no defensive wounds. Crowder hadn't fought. Calder drove back to the station alone. The town was waking up, lights on, trucks rolling, people unaware that something had shifted. In his office, he poured stale coffee and sat down. Elias Crowder was dead on his living room floor, and Grayson was about to remember what violence felt like. Calder opened a legal pad and wrote one word at the top: why. By mid-morning, the news had finished spreading the way it always did in Grayson. Quietly, sideways, through phone calls and lowered voices at the diner. Calder heard it when he walked in. Conversations dipped, then resumed at half volume. Someone dropped a fork. Someone else stared too long. He took his coffee black and sat at the counter. Doris behind the register didn't ask how he was. She just poured. "Who found him?" she said finally. "Paper carrier." Doris shook her head. "Poor kid." Calder let that sit. "You see Elias yesterday?" "Couple days ago. He came in for a sandwich. Complained it was dry." "It was dry?" "It was tuna," Doris said. "Tuna's always dry." Calder almost smiled. Almost. He left a few bills on the counter and stepped back into the cold. His phone buzzed before he reached the cruiser. "Rourke?" "Sheriff? It's Marlene Huxley." Her voice was tight, brittle. He could hear traffic behind her, Highway 9. "I need you to come by," she said. "People are saying things." "People always say things," Calder said. "Where are you?" "My sister's, in town. I'll stop by this afternoon." There was a pause. "You think I did it?" "I didn't say that." "But you're thinking it." Calder closed his eyes for a second. "Marlene, Elias Crowder is dead. I have to think about everyone." She hung up. Calder drove back to the station and found Nolan waiting, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. "Emmy's preliminary came in," Nolan said. "Knife wound to the carotid. Blade was long, sharp. One cut, no hesitation. Anything under his nails?" "Nothing so far." "Paper carrier statement?" "Kid swears he never went past the doorway. Says he didn't touch the body. He's clean." Calder nodded. "Anyone come forward?" "Pastor Whitcomb called. Wants to. Offer support. Of course he does. And Randy Sloane's girlfriend stopped by. Said Randy was with her all night. Volunteered it. We didn't ask." That caught Calder's attention. Did she seem nervous? She seemed eager. Calder stood. "Let's start with Marlene." Marlene Huxley's sister lived in a ranch house on the south end of town. Vinyl siding faded to the color of old teeth. Marlene answered the door before Calder knocked. She looked thinner than he remembered. Harder. Her hair was pulled back tight, like she didn't trust it not to betray her. "You here to arrest me?" she asked. "Not yet," Calder said. "Can we talk?" She stepped aside. They sat at a small kitchen table. A pot of coffee steamed between them. Marlene didn't pour any. "You hated him," Calder said. "I didn't hate him," she said. "I hated what he did." "He foreclosed on your farm." "He strangled it," she said. "Paperwork, deadlines, penalties. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply." "Did you threaten him?" She laughed once, sharp. "Everyone threatened Elias Crowder. He fed on it." "Where were you last night?" "With my sister. You can ask her." "I will." Marlene leaned forward. "You think I'd cut his throat?" "I wanted him to live long enough to see what he did." Calder watched her hands. They were steady. "Did he have visitors?" Calder asked. "Not that I know of. He didn't let people in. He liked control." Anyone he couldn't control, Marlene thought. There was a woman. Used to come around years ago. Quiet. Not from here. Name? Can't remember. He didn't talk about her. Calder stood. "If you remember, call me." She nodded, eyes already distant. Back in the cruiser, Calder made a note. A woman. Quiet. Not from here. He drove next to Randy Sloane's place, a double wide near the river, trash piled high. Randy answered shirtless, jaw tight. "You hear about Elias?" Randy said. "Yes." "I didn't do it." "I didn't say you did," Randy snorted. "Everyone thinks I did." "Where were you?" "With Jenny." "Jenny who?" "Jenny Pierce." Calder nodded. "She came by." Randy's eyes flicked away, just for a second. "You ever been to Crowder's house?" Calder asked. "Once. Years ago. He accused me of stealing diesel. I didn't." "Did you argue recently?" Randy's jaw flexed. "I argue with everyone." Calder studied him. Randy was angry, sure, volatile, but there was something else missing. Relief, maybe. Or satisfaction. He didn't see it. "Don't leave town," Calder said. Randy laughed. "Where would I go?" Back at the station, Calder found Pastor Whitcomb waiting in the lobby, hands folded, expression practiced. "Sheriff," he said, "tragic business." "Yes, I wanted you to know Elias and I were reconciling." "Reconciling what?" "Our differences." He'd agreed to revisit the cemetery boundary. "When was the last time you saw him?" "Sunday, after service." "Anyone with you?" "No." Calder nodded. "Thank you, Pastor." As Whitcomb left, Nolan leaned in. "Bank called. Elias changed his will 3 months ago." Calder looked up. "Left anything to anyone new?" Nolan hesitated. "Left everything to a woman named Ruth Calder." The room went quiet. Calder stared at him. "Spell it. Calder." Calder felt the air leave his lungs. "That's my mother's maiden name," he said. Nolan blinked. "You think it's a coincidence?" Calder stood slowly. Somewhere deep in his chest, something old and buried shifted. "I don't believe in coincidences," he said. Calder drove without turning on the radio. The road out to his mother's place ran narrow and straight, flanked by bare trees and frozen ditches. He hadn't been there in 3 weeks. Too busy, he'd told himself. Too many things needing his attention. Ruth Calder lived in the house he grew up in. White clapboard, sagging porch. The barn long collapsed. She was 76 and stubborn enough to make the world accommodate her. Her car was in the drive. Calder sat in the cruiser for a moment, hands resting on the wheel the way they had that morning outside Crowder's house. He replayed Nolan's words. Left everything. To Ruth Calder. He stepped out and walked up the porch. The boards creaked under his boots. He knocked once. She opened the door almost immediately, as if she'd been standing there. "Cal," she said. "Mom." She looked past him, down the road. "You're early. We need to talk." She stepped aside. The house smelled like boiled cabbage and furniture polish. Nothing had changed. Same couch. Same clock on the wall. It ticked. They sat at the kitchen table. She poured him tea. He didn't touch it. "Did you know Elias Crowder?" Calder asked. She met his eyes. "Yes." "How long?" "A long time." "Why didn't you tell me?" "You never asked." Calder leaned back. He changed his will. "I know. Left everything to you." "Yes." "Why?" She folded her hands. They trembled, just a little. "He was my brother," she said. The words landed heavy. Calder felt a pressure behind his eyes, like altitude sickness. "My brother," she repeated. "Half-brother. Same father." Calder stared at her. "You never told me." "It wasn't something to be proud of," she said. "Your grandfather was a liar. Elias was proof of it." Why now? Calder asked. Why did he leave you anything? Because he was dying, she said, and because he was afraid. Afraid of what? She hesitated. Of the woman. Calder leaned forward. What woman? She came back, Ruth said. After all these years. Her name is Helen Morrow. Calder wrote it down. She and Elias, it was complicated, Ruth said. She lived with him once, briefly. Then she left. He never forgave her. Or maybe he never forgave himself. When did she come back? 2 weeks ago. She showed up at his door. I was there. Calder's jaw tightened. You were visiting him? Yes. Why didn't you tell me that either? Ruth looked at him. Because you're the sheriff. Calder stood. Did you see her again? No. Did Elias say he was in danger? He said she wanted something, Ruth said. I didn't ask what. Calder drove back to the station with Helen Morrow's name burning a hole in his pocket. Nolan was on the phone when he walked in. We found her, Nolan said, hanging up. Lives in a rental outside town. Came back from Des Moines. Has a record. Assault charge. 10 years back. Calder nodded. Get a warrant. They pulled up to the rental just after dark. Lights were on. A car sat in the drive. Sheriff! Helen called when Calder knocked. I knew you'd come. She was mid-50s. Hair gray at the temples, eyes sharp. She didn't resist as they cuffed her. In the interrogation room, she sat straight, hands folded. I didn't kill him, she said. Why'd you come back? Calder asked. To make him pay, she said. Not with blood, with truth. What truth? He raped me, she said flatly, years ago. Everyone thought I was his girlfriend. I was his prisoner. Calder felt the room tighten. Why didn't you report it? She laughed, bitter. In Grayson? Against Elias Crowder? You threatened him, Calder said. Yes. You wanted something. I wanted him to admit it, she said. To sign a statement. He refused. Where were you last night? At the motel on Route 3? Ask the clerk. Calder studied her. She was angry, broken, but something didn't fit. Back at the station, the clerk confirmed her alibi. Calder sat alone in his office, the case file spread out. Motive everywhere. Opportunity thin. He stared at the crime scene photos again. The clean cut. No struggle. Someone Crowder trusted. The will. The smear on the porch. Calder closed his eyes. When he opened them, he knew. He stood and walked to the evidence locker. He pulled the knife from the block. Crowder's knife. The ME had logged fingerprints. Partial. Smudged. He picked up the report. One print was clear enough. It matched Ruth Calder. Calder sat back down, the weight of it settling in his bones. Calder waited until morning. He told himself it was procedure. Told himself evidence aged better in daylight, that arrests made too quickly cracked under scrutiny. But the truth sat quieter and heavier. Once he said it out loud, there would be no way back. At 7:42 a.m., he called Nolan into his office and shut the door. I need you to listen, Calder said, and I need you to do exactly what I say. Nolan frowned. That sounds bad. Calder slid the fingerprint report across the desk. Nolan read it once, then again. Ruth Calder, Nolan said softly. You're... My mother, Calder said. Yes. Silence thickened the room. She was at the house 2 weeks ago, Calder continued. She knew Crowder. He was her half-brother. She had motive. She had access. And her prints on the knife. Nolan leaned back, processing. You want me to arrest her? I want you to help me do this right, Calder said. No shortcuts, no favors. We treat this like any other case, Nolan nodded. Then we bring her in. They drove together. Calder didn't say much on the way. The fields looked the same as always, flat, honest in their emptiness. He wondered how many times he'd passed this truth without seeing it. Ruth answered the door slower this time. "Cal," she said, "you look tired." "We need to talk," he said. "At the station." Her eyes flicked to Nolan. She seemed to understand immediately. No denial, no surprise. "Let me get my coat," she said. In the interrogation room, she sat smaller than Calder remembered. The fluorescent lights were unkind. Calder stayed standing. "We found your fingerprints on the knife," he said. She nodded. "I thought you might." "Why?" Nolan asked. Ruth folded her hands. "Because I didn't wear gloves." Calder felt something fracture inside him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. "Any of it." "Because I raised you better than that," she said. "You would have tried to stop me." Nolan shifted uncomfortably. "Tell us what happened," Calder said. Ruth took a breath. "Elias called me last night. Late. Said Helen had threatened him again. He was afraid. I drove out there." "You brought a knife?" Nolan asked. "No, it was his," Ruth said. "We argued. He laughed at me. Said I was finally useful, cleaning up after him." Calder closed his eyes. "He told me what he did to Helen," Ruth continued, "like it was nothing, like he was proud. I'd known pieces before, but never that. Never the way he said it." She looked at Calder then. "He hurt people, Cal. He hurt women. He hurt our family. So you killed him," Calder said. "Yes." Nolan exhaled slowly. "He sat down," Ruth said. "Poured himself a drink. Told me I should be grateful he left me something. That I owed him." Her voice didn't shake. "I stood behind him. I cut his throat. He didn't even turn around." Calder gripped the edge of the table. "What about the smear on the porch?" Nolan asked. "I stepped in the blood," Ruth said. "Wiped my shoe before I left. Habit." Calder thought of all the things she'd taught him. "Clean as you go. Don't leave a mess for someone else." "You know I have to arrest you," Calder said. She nodded. "I was counting on it." As Nolan led her out, Ruth paused at the door and looked back at Calder. "I'm sorry," she said. "Not for him. For you." Calder watched her go. Outside, the town moved on. Trucks, dogs, church bells. The world didn't pause for justice. It never had. Calder sat alone in the interrogation room long after, staring at the empty chair where his mother had been, knowing the last thing Elias Crowder ever trusted was family, and it was the thing that killed him. The county attorney arrived just before noon. Calder didn't greet him at the door, didn't offer coffee. He sat in his office and waited while the machinery he'd served for over a decade turned its attention inward. Ruth Calder was booked without ceremony, fingerprinted, photographed, placed in holding, no cuffs in the hallway. Calder made sure of that, but procedure carried its own weight. He watched through the observation window as she sat on the bench, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on nothing. Nolan knocked softly and stepped in. "Sioux City wants jurisdiction," he said. "Given circumstances." Calder nodded. "That's fine. They'll send detectives. Internal review, too." "I expected that." Nolan hesitated. "You want me to take over lead?" Calder thought about it, about what it would mean to stay. To go home tonight and see his mother's house dark, knowing she wouldn't be there again. "No," he said. "I'll finish it." The county attorney, Mark Ellison, finally came in. He was younger than Calder, ambitious in a way Calder had outgrown. "This is a mess," Ellison said. "It's a homicide," Calder replied. "They usually are." Ellison rubbed his temples. "Your mother confessed." On tape, with counsel present. She waived counsel. "She was informed of her rights," Calder said. "Twice." Ellison sighed. "The defense will eat this alive." "There won't be a defense," Calder said quietly. "She's not contesting it." Ellison studied him. "You sure you're okay to testify?" Calder met his eyes. "I'm sure." By evening, word had spread again, this time faster, sharper. People stood outside the station, not protesting, watching, trying to understand how the ground under them had shifted. Calder stepped out once, just long enough to address them. "The suspect is in custody," he said. "There is no danger to the public." Someone asked who it was. Calder didn't answer. That night, he drove past Crowder's house. The lights were off. Evidence tape fluttered in the wind. A thin yellow line trying to hold something together that was already gone. He parked and sat there for a while. Crowder had been wrong about one thing. Family wasn't a shield. It was leverage. It cut deeper because it knew where to land. Calder went home to an empty house and slept for 3 hours. He woke before dawn to his phone vibrating on the nightstand. "Sheriff," Nolan said. "You need to come in." Calder sat up. "What happened?" "Helen Morrow," Nolan said. "She tried to hang herself in her motel room." Calder closed his eyes. "Is she alive?" "Yes, barely. I'm on my way." At the hospital, Helen lay pale against white sheets, a livid mark around her neck. She looked smaller than she had in the interrogation room. Less sharp, more tired. Calder stood at the foot of the bed. "You didn't do it," he said. She laughed weakly. "Doesn't matter." "It does," Calder said. Ruth Calder confessed. Helen's eyes flicked to him. "Your mother?" "Yes." Silence stretched. "She believed you," Calder said. "About what he did." Helen swallowed. "She was the only one." Calder nodded. "She asked me to tell you she was sorry she didn't act sooner." Helen's eyes filled, then spilled. She turned her face away. Calder left her there. By the end of the day, Sioux City detectives had arrived. Statements were taken. Files copied. Calder answered questions until his voice went flat. When it was done, Nolan stood in the doorway of his office. "What happens now?" Nolan asked. Calder looked around the room. The badge on the wall, the map with pins, the legal pad with Y still written at the top. "I finished the paperwork," he said. "And I take some time," Nolan nodded. "Town will survive." Calder wasn't so sure. He locked the station that night and drove out past the fields again. The frost had returned, silvering the ground. Somewhere out there, a house sat empty, and another waited for its owner to come home and never would. Calder pulled over and shut off the engine. For the first time since the call came in, he let himself feel it. The weight, the grief, the knowledge that justice didn't always look like victory. Sometimes it just looked like truth. The arraignment was set for Monday. Ruth Calder didn't ask Calder to be there. He went anyway, sitting in the back of the small county courtroom, hands folded, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the pew in front of him. She entered in an orange jumpsuit, smaller still, flanked by a public defender she'd met twice. When she saw Calder, she didn't smile. She just nodded once. An acknowledgement. Nothing more. She pleaded guilty. No theatrics. No statements. Just a quiet admission entered into the record, like a fact the room had been waiting to accept. The judge set sentencing for 30 days out. Given her age, health, and confession, There was talk of leniency. State prison was unlikely. A secured medical facility, maybe. Time measured in years she probably didn't have many of. Calder left before it ended. By Wednesday, the station felt different. Quieter, but not calmer. People avoided his eyes. Others lingered too long, wanting to say something and not knowing how. A few said they were sorry. A few said nothing at all. Pastor Whitcomb dropped off a casserole. Calder threw it out. Helen Morrow was transferred to a psychiatric unit in Des Moines. Before she left, she asked to see Calder one last time. "I don't forgive him," she said, "but I forgive her." Calder nodded. It was more grace than he'd expected the world to offer. That night, Calder drove out to his mother's house. The state had already changed the locks. He stood on the porch, the same boards creaking under his weight, and realized he didn't know if he'd ever step inside again. He didn't try. The resignation letter took him less time than he thought. 2 pages, no explanations, no defenses. He handed it to the county board on Friday morning. "You don't have to do this," one of them said. "Yes," Calder replied, "I do." His badge went into a plain envelope, his gun into evidence storage. Nolan shook his hand in the hallway, grip firm, eyes wet but steady. "You were a good sheriff," Nolan said. Calder nodded. "You'll be better." On his last night in Grayson, Calder drove out past County Road 6 one final time. The fields were thawing now, dark and wet, ready for planting. Life preparing itself without permission. He stopped where Crowder's driveway met the road. The house was still empty, slated for sale, a relic waiting for strangers. Calder thought about Elias Crowder's last moments, how he'd trusted the wrong person for the right reason. Thought about his mother, sitting alone in a cell, finally having done the one thing she'd spent her life avoiding. He started the engine and drove on. Grayson shrank behind him in the rearview mirror, just another town among thousands, holding its secrets close until it couldn't anymore. The road ahead was straight. Calder followed it. Now let's jump into the next story. The last time anyone saw Lila Serrano, she was walking east along County Road J, with a grocery sack, tearing at the seam and dust already clinging to the cuffs of her jeans. That much was agreed upon. Everything else came later, layered with speculation and unease. Detective Evan Whitlock arrived in San Jacinto Valley just after dawn, when the fields were still holding their breath. The light came in pale and slanted, turning the rows of almonds into long, repeating shadows that looked like bars. The sheriff's substation was a converted feed store with a flag out front and a coffee pot that had been burning since sometime before midnight. Whitlock didn't pour any. He took the folder from Deputy Mallory Finch and stepped back outside, letting the cold work on him. Lila Serrano, 29. Lifelong resident. Worked part-time at the Dollar General in Red Bluff, commuted twice a week to take care of her mother before the stroke put her in assisted living 2 counties over. No boyfriend, no car, no known enemies. Disappeared 3 nights ago, walking the 6-mile stretch between the store and her rented trailer on the edge of the valley. 6 miles of nothing. Whitlock drove it slow, windows down, dust lifting in thin sheets behind the tires. The valley wasn't empty, not really. It was full of things that didn't move much. Almond groves, abandoned irrigation rigs, a few scattered houses that looked more like apologies than homes. The kind of place where you could scream and be heard by no one, or everyone, depending on the wind. At mile marker 3, he stopped. There was a shallow turnout where someone had pulled off recently. Fresh enough that the ground still showed the print of tires, the dirt compacted into a pattern Whitlock didn't recognize immediately. He crouched, touched the earth. Dry. Powder fine. No footprints nearby, but that didn't mean much. Wind erased things out here quickly. Finch had told him about the bag. It was found 50 yards down a service road that branched off the main drag, half hidden in weeds that grew stubbornly around a rusted culvert. The paper sack had split completely, spilling its contents like a small confession. Canned soup, boxed pasta, a cheap bottle of shampoo. No blood, no sign of a struggle. Just abandonment. Whitlock stood there longer than he needed to, listening. Somewhere far off, a pump kicked on, the mechanical rhythm steady and indifferent. People didn't vanish like this without help. Not usually. They left behind a direction, a pattern. Lila had none. He drove on, stopping at her trailer just past noon. It sat alone at the end of a dirt spur, the nearest neighbor half a mile away, and not the kind of neighbor who watched closely. The door was locked. No sign of forced entry. Inside, everything was neat in a way that suggested habit, not performance. Dishes washed. Bed made. A calendar on the wall with neat handwriting. Work shifts circled. Her mother's physical therapy appointments written in blue ink. 3 days ago was blank. Whitlock noticed the shoes by the door. Worn sneakers. Dusted but dry. If she'd come home, she'd changed. If she'd planned to be gone, she'd taken them. He took photos, careful not to disturb the quiet more than necessary. In the bathroom, a toothbrush still damp. In the kitchen, a phone charger plugged in, cord coiled loosely. No phone. Outside, he found the tracks again, different from the turnout. Boot prints this time, heavier tread. Men's, likely. They cut across the dirt road behind the trailer, angling toward the orchards. Could have been anyone. Farm laborers passed through all the time, especially this season. Still, he followed them until they disappeared into churned soil and leaves. Back at the substation, Whitlock sat down with Sheriff Caleb Roark, a man whose face looked permanently braced for bad news. Roark had grown up here. He knew every family, every feud, every quiet understanding that kept the valley from tearing itself apart. She wouldn't just run, Roark said, more statement than opinion. Lila was steady, took care of her own. Whitlock nodded. Anyone give her trouble? Not that she mentioned. She kept to herself. That usually means she didn't trust you, Whitlock said without malice. Roark smiled thinly. They went through the list of locals who'd driven that road around the time she disappeared. Farmhands, delivery drivers, one out-of-town truck logged by a traffic cam 20 miles south. Nothing that sang. The problem with places like this was the space. Too much of it. You could hide a person in plain sight, and the land would close over them like water. That night, Whitlock walked the stretch again on foot, starting where the grocery sack was found. The moon was thin, the stars sharp. Every sound carried. Insects, the distant bark of a dog, the low hum of generators. Halfway down the service road, he found something new. A strip of fabric caught on a thorn bush. Dark blue. Denim. Torn, not cut. He stood there, the valley breathing around him, and felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the sense that the ground had shifted just slightly, and that whatever had taken Lila Serrano had done so carefully with time and knowledge on its side. Missing was just the first word people used. It was rarely the last. By morning, the fabric strip was sealed in an evidence bag, and the service road was marked with thin orange flags that fluttered uselessly in the breeze. Whitlock stood with his hands on his hips, watching two deputies sweep the brush in widening arcs. It was methodical work, the kind that looked productive without promising anything. He already knew what they wouldn't find. Denim tore easily when pulled against thorns, especially if someone stumbled or was dragged. The tear told him movement, not intent. Panic, maybe. or surprise. The lab confirmed the obvious by mid-afternoon. The fabric matched Lila Serrano's jeans. No blood, no foreign fibers. Clean in the way only dry country could make something. Whitlock drove to the Dollar General next. It squatted at the edge of Red Bluff like a temporary solution that had become permanent. Sun-bleached signage, windows cluttered with sale posters curling at the corners. Inside, the air smelled of plastic and old candy. The manager, a woman named Tricia Knoll, recognized Lila immediately from the photo. "She walked home a lot," Knoll said, folding her arms. "Didn't like rides. Said it made her feel dependent." "Anyone talk to her that night?" Whitlock asked. Knoll thought. "There was a guy, maybe. He asked her where the nearest gas station was. She told him the Chevron was 15 minutes back, the way he came." "What kind of guy?" "White. 30s, maybe? Beard. Work boots," she shrugged. "That's most guys around here." "Vehicle?" "Truck. Dark. Sorry." Whitlock wasn't surprised. Descriptions blurred in places where people blended together. Still, he checked the register tape. Time-stamped receipts put Lila leaving at 8:17 p.m. Sunset had been just before 8, dark enough. He canvassed the parking lot anyway, noting camera placements, angles, blind spots. One camera faced the entrance, another the lot. The footage showed Lila exiting with the grocery sack tucked against her hip, walking past a dark pickup parked crooked near the edge of the frame. The driver's side door opened briefly. Someone leaned out, said something. Lila didn't stop. The truck door closed. The vehicle pulled out 2 minutes later, heading east. Whitlock watched it 3 times. The resolution was poor, the plate unreadable. But the timing lodged in his mind like a burr. Back at the substation, Sheriff Rourke had laid out a map on the conference table. Pushpins marked properties along County Road J, each tagged with names. "We've got 3 registered dark pickups in the immediate area," Rourke said. "One belongs to a farm supervisor, one to a retired contractor, one to a seasonal hand who left yesterday morning." "Name?" "Wyatt Kincaid." Whitlock nodded. "Where'd he go?" "Don't know. Paid cash for a room in Chico last month. No forwarding address. They paid a visit to the farm supervisor first. The man was sun-leathered and bored by the whole thing, his truck parked in plain view and clean to the point of insult. The retired contractor was worse, defensive, loud, eager to tell them about his rights. Kincaid's place was a different matter." The trailer sat back from the road, screened by eucalyptus trees that shed bark like peeling skin. The door was padlocked. Inside, through the window, Whitlock saw a mattress on the floor and a folding chair. No personal effects worth mentioning. No truck. "Seasonals move fast," Rourke said. "Could be nothing." Whitlock didn't answer. He was looking at the ground near the hitch. Fresh tire impressions, deeper than the surrounding dirt. Heavy load. They put out a bolo anyway, thin as it was. Whitlock hated those. They felt like apologies. That evening, he went back to Lila's trailer alone. The light was fading again, the valley shifting into that uncertain blue, where shapes softened and distance lied. He walked the dirt spur behind her place, stopping where the boot prints had crossed days earlier. He knelt, brushed away loose soil with his fingers. There was something else there now that he'd missed before. A shallow depression, irregular, like the ground had been compressed by weight. Someone kneeling, maybe. Or something set down and lifted again. He closed his eyes, reconstructed it. A stop. Words exchanged. A moment where choices still existed. A vehicle idled nearby. Whitlock stood and looked toward the orchards. The trees were planted in perfect rows, the ground between them swept clean by habit. Easy to walk, easy to carry. He drove the perimeter until night fully took hold. headlights carving tunnels through dust. At the far end of the property line, he found a gate ajar. The chain hung loose, padlock missing. Beyond it, a service road cut deeper into the groves, away from anything marked on the map. He followed it for half a mile before the road ended at an irrigation reservoir. A broad, shallow basin lined with black plastic, water reflecting the stars in a dull sheen. Pumps hummed at the far end. Whitlock got out, the sound of insects swelling around him. He walked the edge slowly, scanning for disturbance. The plastic lining was scuffed near one corner, the water line uneven. He crouched, touched the surface. Cold. Dumping a body here would be lazy, he thought. The pumps would draw attention. Animals would surface things. Whoever had taken Lila Serrano hadn't been lazy so far. Back in his car, his phone buzzed. Roark. "We've got something," the sheriff said. Search team found her phone. "Where?" "Ditch off J about a mile east of the bag." Screen cracked. "No power." Whitlock closed his eyes briefly. Phones didn't fall into ditches by accident, not intact. They were thrown, discarded. Another decision made. "Anything on it?" he asked. "Tech's working it now." "But Evan—" Rourke hesitated. "There's more." Whitlock waited. A rancher called in. Says he heard a woman screaming 2 nights ago. Thought it was coyotes. Location's off Old Mill Road. Whitlock started the engine. Old Mill Road ran parallel to County J for a stretch, before veering south into rougher land. Scrub, abandoned homesteads, dry creek beds that only remembered water. It was the kind of place people ignored until they needed it. As he drove, Whitlock felt the case tightening, the wide valley drawing inward. Missing had already given way to something heavier, something with gravity, and gravity, once it took hold, didn't let go easily. Old Mill Road was barely a road anymore, packed dirt scored by years of neglect, flanked by fences that leaned as if tired of standing. Whitlock killed his headlights a quarter-mile out and rolled the rest of the way on momentum, dust whispering beneath the tires. The rancher's property sat low, a sprawl of scrub and rusted equipment silhouetted against the stars. Sheriff Rourke's unit was already there, light bars dark, men moving with flashlights cupped low. No urgency. That told Whitlock everything he needed to know about what they hadn't found yet. Rourke met him near a collapsed shed. He heard it around 10. Rourke said quietly. Short. 1 scream. Maybe 2. Then nothing. Why wait 2 days? Rourke shrugged. Coyotes scream like people out here. So do foxes. You learn to sleep through it. Whitlock nodded, though it sat wrong in his gut. Human screams carried something else. Panic had a pitch animals never quite reached. They walked the perimeter together. The ground was harder here, packed with stones and dry roots, but the beam of Whitlock's flashlight caught disturbances all the same. Scuffed dirt, bent weeds, a dragged pattern leading toward a shallow arroyo. Down in the dry creek bed, the air felt cooler. The walls rose just high enough to hide movement from the road. Whitlock followed the beam along the bank. That's where he saw it. A footprint in the mud where a trickle of water had recently pooled. Boot tread, deep and clean. Next to it, smaller. Sneakers. Whitlock exhaled slowly. She was alive here, he said. They flagged the area and called in the search team, this time with dogs. The K-9 unit arrived just before dawn, handlers moving with quiet purpose. The dogs caught scent quickly, noses low, tails stiff. The trail ran south. It led them through brush, over a low fence, into a stand of oaks that hadn't seen a human presence in years. The dogs pulled harder here, urgency bleeding into their movements. Then they stopped. Whitlock knew the moment before anyone said anything. It was a feeling he'd learned to trust, the subtle shift when a case crossed a line it couldn't uncross. They found Lila Serrano at the base of an oak, partially covered with branches arranged too deliberately to be natural. Her face was turned away, hair matted with dirt. One arm lay at an unnatural angle beneath her body. The paramedics pronounced her where she lay. Whitlock stood back as the scene came alive with procedure. Photographs, measurements, latex gloves snapping into place. The branches were removed carefully, one by one, revealing bruising along her neck, dark and unmistakable even in the low light. Manual strangulation. No blood, no gun, no knife. Someone had used their hands. She fought, the coroner said quietly, gesturing to the abrasions on Lila's forearms. Scratches, defensive wounds. Whitlock closed his eyes briefly. He pictured the scream, cut short, the valley swallowing the sound. By mid-morning, the name Wyatt Kincaid was no longer just a lead. The phone records pulled from Lila's recovered device showed an unanswered call placed at 8:31 p.m. to a number registered under a prepaid plan recently activated. The same number pinged a tower near Old Mill Road that night. Kincaid's last known paycheck had been cashed at a liquor store off Highway 99. Surveillance footage showed him there the morning after Lila disappeared, jaw tight, knuckles scraped raw. He bought beer and bandages. They found the truck abandoned outside Chico 2 hours later. Dark pickup, mud-caked undercarriage. Inside, a pair of work boots sat on the floorboard, soles still damp. The lab would later confirm what Whitlock already suspected. Soil consistent with the creek bed, fibers matching Lila's jeans embedded in the laces. Kincaid himself didn't run far. They caught him that night in a flophouse outside Reading, sitting on the edge of a bed, staring at nothing. He didn't resist. Didn't ask for a lawyer. His hands shook when they cuffed him. In the interview room, he smelled of sweat and stale beer. He stared at the table like it might give him instructions. "I didn't mean to kill her," he said eventually, voice thin. "She got scared, started yelling. You grabbed her," Whitlock said. Kincaid nodded. "Just to make her listen." Hands. Always hands. He talked after that, words spilling once the dam broke. He'd offered her a ride. She'd refused. He followed anyway. Told himself it was just to make sure she got home. On the service road, he'd pulled over again. This time she'd backed away. Ran. He caught her near the creek. "She kept saying she'd tell," he whispered. "I panicked." Whitlock listened without interruption, the story slotting neatly into place. It always did, once the truth surfaced. Ugly, mundane, human. When it was over, Whitlock stepped outside. The night air was cool, the stars muted by city glow. Somewhere far south, the valley stretched on, indifferent as ever. Lila Serrano would be buried back home, near the orchard she'd walked past her whole life. The road would stay empty. The wind would keep erasing footprints. And eventually, people would stop saying her name. Whitlock lit a cigarette he wouldn't finish, watching the smoke drift upward and disappear. Cases ended. The land remembered longer. The confession sat wrong with Whitlock from the moment the door closed behind Kincaid. It was too neat. Too linear. Panic stories usually were. Fear sanding off the edges, leaving something simple enough to survive retelling. But the valley had taught Whitlock to distrust simplicity. Nothing out here was ever just one thing. He went back to the creek bed alone the next morning. The oak where they'd found Lila Serrano was already stripped bare, yellow tape gone, Branches returned to the ground in a rough approximation of nature. But the land didn't reset the way people expected it to. It kept memory in small ways. A snapped twig, a scuffed stone, a place where grass refused to stand back up. Whitlock traced the path again, slow. He noted the distance from Old Mill Road to the tree, farther than Kincaid had described, too far for a brief chase fueled by panic. The ground sloped unevenly, the kind of terrain that punished haste, yet there were no signs of repeated falls, no blood from scraped hands or knees. Someone had moved carefully here. He knelt near the base of the oak and studied the soil. The drag marks were faint but present, running not from the road but from deeper in the trees. Opposite direction. Whitlock straightened, heart ticking up a notch. Back at the substation, he pulled the autopsy report from the printer himself. The coroner had been cautious, language measured, but one line stood out now that Whitlock read it again. Petechial hemorrhaging present. Time to death estimated at several minutes. Manual strangulation took effort. Sustained pressure. Panic faded quickly when muscles burned. Whoever killed Lila had held on longer than fear alone required. He went to see Kincaid again that afternoon. The man looked worse in daylight, skin gray, eyes sunk deep. He repeated his story with minor variations. She ran, she screamed, he grabbed, she went limp. He cried at the same places, as if hitting marks. Whitlock interrupted him. "Which hand did you use?" Kincaid blinked. "What? Your hands? Which one was on her throat?" Kincaid hesitated. "Both, I think. I don't remember." "You remember the beer you bought after," Whitlock said. "You remember the bandages. You remember where you parked the truck. But not that." Kincaid's mouth opened, closed. Whitlock leaned back. "You're right about one thing. You didn't mean to kill her." Kincaid's shoulders sagged with relief. "You meant to scare her," Whitlock continued. "You meant to stop her. But that doesn't explain the rest." "What rest?" Kincaid asked, voice small. Whitlock stood. He didn't answer. Instead, he drove south. The land beyond Old Mill Road changed subtly. More scrub, fewer trees, the kind of place developers once talked about and then forgot. Half a mile out, he found the old homestead the rancher had mentioned in passing. Collapsed roof, walls standing out of habit more than strength. Inside, the air was stale, thick with rodent droppings and dust. Whitlock moved carefully, scanning the ground. There were footprints, more than one set. Boot prints, yes, but also smaller, lighter impressions overlapping them. Sneakers. And something else. The faint parallel lines of something dragged across dirt and debris. Near the back wall, he found a stain soaked deep into the earth. Not blood, urine. Fear, not injury. Lila had been here first. Whitlock's phone buzzed. Roark. "Lab's done with the phone," the sheriff said. "Deleted messages recovered. There's a thread we missed." "From Kincaid." "No different number. Older guy. Local." Whitlock closed his eyes. "Name, Harold Pike." The name landed hard. Pike owned land near Old Mill Road, had for decades, kept to himself. The kind of man who waved without smiling, who watched, but didn't speak. Whitlock drove straight there. Pike's ranch was neat in a way that felt rehearsed. Fences mended too recently, tools aligned too precisely. Pike himself answered the door without surprise. "Afternoon, detective," he said. "I was wondering when you'd come back." Whitlock studied him. 70, maybe. Lean. Hands steady. "Lila Serrano was here," Whitlock said. Pike nodded once. "Yes." No denial. No confusion. "She came by sometimes," Pike said. "Asked for water. Used my phone once when hers died. You messaged her the night she disappeared." "Yes." Whitlock waited. "I saw her walking," Pike continued. "Trucks slowed near her. I didn't like the look of it. I texted her, told her she could cut through my land if she wanted. Safer." Whitlock's jaw tightened. "She came to you for help." "Yes, and you took her to the homestead." Pike's eyes flickered. "Just once. I told her to wait there. I went to get my truck." "You left her alone." "I did." "And when you came back?" Pike swallowed. "She was gone." Then later, I heard shouting from the creek. Whitlock stepped closer. "You followed?" "Yes, and you saw Kincaid." "I did." "What happened next, Harold?" Pike's shoulders sagged, the first row crack in him. "I yelled. He ran. She was on the ground. Not breathing right. I tried." His voice broke. "I tried to help her. But she died." Pike nodded, tears finally spilling. "I panicked. I thought they'd blame me. An old man alone with a young woman." "So you covered her," Whitlock said. "And you let Kincaid take the fall." Pike didn't argue. Whitlock felt the weight of it settle. 2 men, 2 failures. 1 dead woman caught between them. They arrested Pike without resistance. Later, alone again, Whitlock drove County Road J as the sun set, the valley long and quiet. The road hadn't changed. The land hadn't shifted. But the story had. And it wasn't finished yet. They charged Pike with obstruction and tampering that night. Not homicide. Not yet. Whitlock watched the paperwork move across desks, watched the system do what it always did when the truth refused to stay in one shape. Kincaid was still in a cell down the hall, convinced he was finished. Pike sat in another, silent now, eyes fixed on something only he could see. 2 men, 2 versions of the same night. Neither clean. Whitlock slept for 3 hours and woke with the same pressure behind his eyes. He showered, changed shirts, and drove back to Old Mill Road before the sun burned the fog away. The homestead felt different in daylight. Smaller, less theatrical. Fear shrank things after the fact. He walked it again, slower than before, forcing himself to ignore what he thought he knew. He followed the drag marks, measured the distance between them and the creek bed. Too far for a dying woman to be carried alone by a man Pike's age. Too uneven. He crouched near the back wall where the urine stain darkened the dirt. Above it, faint on the wood, were scratches. Fingernails. Desperate. Uncontrolled. Someone had held her here. Whitlock straightened. Pulse steady, but hard. He stepped outside and walked the perimeter. That's when he saw the second path, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. Grass bent not away from the homestead, but toward it. Parallel impressions. 2 people walking side by side. Not a chase. An escort. He drove straight back to the substation and pulled Kincaid's interview transcripts. Read them line by line. The inconsistencies weren't loud. They were subtle, timing off by minutes. Locations shifted just enough to seem accidental. The kind of errors that came from rehearsed truth, not panic. Whitlock went to see him again. Kincaid looked up when Whitlock entered, eyes flicking to the door, then away. He'd been crying. Real this time. "You lied," Whitlock said, sitting. Kincaid shook his head automatically. "I told you what happened." "You told me what needed to happen," Whitlock replied. "You followed her. That part's true. But you didn't catch her at the creek." Kincaid swallowed. "You caught her earlier," Whitlock continued. "Near Pike's land. You scared her. You dragged her to the homestead." "No," Kincaid said. Too fast. You didn't kill her there, Whitlock said. You didn't even mean to. You left her. Went for beer. Bandages. You came back later. Silence. And by then, Whitlock said softly, she was already hurt. Kincaid's shoulders began to shake. She was alive when I left, he whispered. I swear, Whitlock believed him. She trusted Pike, Kincaid said. That's why she didn't scream at first. He told her she was safe. Whitlock stood slowly. Pike's version cracked open after that. Confronted with the physical evidence, the drag distance, the timing, the marks on the wall, his calm dissolved into something brittle. He admitted to more, then less, then more again, truth sliding in and out of reach. He'd seen the truck slow near Lila. That part was true. He'd texted her. Also true. But he hadn't meant to help her. He'd been watching her for months. The walks. The routines. The vulnerability of someone without a car, without witnesses. He told himself stories about protection, about neighborliness. They sounded better than desire, better than need. When she came onto his land, frightened and grateful, something in him tipped. He took her to the homestead to wait. He touched her there. She resisted. He panicked. Not with fear, but with anger. A lifetime of restraint collapsing inward. He strangled her when she screamed. Not long, not enough to kill her. Then he left her there, gasping, confused, terrified of what he'd just done and what it meant. He told himself she'd recover, told himself he'd imagined the worst of it. By the time Kincaid returned to the area and found her stumbling toward the creek, barely conscious, the damage was already done. Kincaid finished what Pike started, not with intent, but with pressure and ignorance and fear. 2 hands, hours apart. 2 causes. 1, death. The medical examiner amended the report. Combined asphyxia, contributing trauma. Causation became shared. Responsibility indivisible. They charged Pike with sexual assault and manslaughter. Kincaid with murder. Whitlock drove the valley one last time before he left, dust lifting behind him, almond trees standing in endless rows. The road was the same. It always was. Lila Serrano had walked it alone. Men had followed. The land hadn't cared which one reached her first.